All right, buckle up because today we're taking a deep dive into the career of Michael Schumacher. And before you think, oh, another racing legend story, this time it's different.
It is, and you know why? Because you specifically came to us bringing Michael Schumacher's Wikipedia page and asking for something more than just the trophies and the victories.
You got it. This isn't about listing championships. It's about understanding what fueled those wins, what made Schumacher Schumacher. And the Wikipedia article you gave us, it's a great starting point because, spoiler alert, this story starts way before Formula One.
Oh yeah, way before. We're talking about a kid who was practically raised on a go-kart track. I mean, his dad modified a pedal cart for him when he was just 4 years old.
Four? Seriously. Most kids are still trying to figure out which Lego goes where. That's incredible.
It is. It shows that this wasn't just a passing interest, this passion for speed. It was ingrained early on. And it's not like he was just along for the ride either.
Yep.
By 12, Schumacher is getting his karting license in. Get this, Luxembourg, because the minimum age in Germany was too high.
That's some serious dedication right there. Talk about driven.
And you know what? This determination, this drive, it was forged, at least in part, by circumstance. Schumacher's parents weren't wealthy. They both worked multiple jobs, anything to support his racing.
Wow.
Yeah, and it wasn't just the parents. Even back then, people could see he was special. The local business community actually chipped in to help him keep racing.
They saw the potential that early on. That's amazing. Okay, but talent can only take you so far, right? Schumacher was often called the ultimate driving machine. He was known for pushing the limits of what was possible on the track. And part of that was his legendary training regimen. 4 hours a day, focused on building the neck muscles to withstand those insane G-forces.
Which, by the way, totally changed how F1 drivers trained.
Yeah.
For Schumacher, it was about general fitness.
Mhm.
But he brought this incredibly focused, almost scientific approach. This wasn't just driving talent anymore. It was about pushing your body and mind to the absolute limit.
And it went beyond just physical training, too. The stories about him studying telemetry data, like really obsessing over it, are incredible. Imagine being Martin Brundle, another driver, right? And being blown away by how Schumacher was taking corners.
And for those who might not be familiar with telemetry, just imagine it gives you all the data on how the car is performing, speed, braking, everything.
Right.
So Brundle's looking at this data, and he's shocked because Schumacher is braking later, taking lines that nobody else would even attempt. And he could do this because he'd studied the data, figured out exactly what the car could handle, and then, well, he went beyond.
Like, he could see the future of the race in the numbers. It's wild.
Hmm.
And then you've got the nicknames. The Rain King. This guy was almost untouchable in wet conditions, which any racing fan knows is a completely different beast.
It really is.
Yeah.
And that wasn't just luck. Schumacher had this amazing ability to read the track in the rain, to understand how the water affected everything, the grip, the braking points, and he'd adjust his car setup in ways that other drivers you wouldn't even consider. It was this mix of daring and meticulous preparation. That's what made him seem almost invincible in the wet.
And then there's the Red Baron, a nickname with some serious historical weight, connecting him to Manfred von Richthofen, the German flying ace from World War I.
Yeah, and that's a really fascinating choice for a nickname because on one hand, it speaks to his incredible skill and dominance on the track. Like the Red Baron in the air, Schumacher was this dominant force in Formula One.
Right.
But on the other hand, it highlights how we view athletes who kind of like transcend their sport. They become these larger-than-life figures, these almost mythical, almost legendary figures, woven into the fabric of history.
Absolutely. So we've got this incredibly dedicated, almost supernaturally skilled driver. But like many legends, there's another side to the story. Because controversy, well, it seemed to follow Schumacher, especially when you look at those two championship-defining crashes.
You're right. And it's like when you reach Schumacher's level of success, every move is analyzed, every decision is debated. And in his case, two incidents really stand out: the 1994 Australian Grand Prix and the 1997 European Grand Prix.
Yeah, in '94, it was Schumacher versus Damon Hill for the championship. Both of them were neck and neck going into the final race of the season. And long story short, Schumacher ends up colliding with Hill.
And both of them were taken out of the race.
Taking both of them out.
Yeah. And because of how the point system worked back then, that move, that collision, it actually secured the championship for Schumacher.
Wow. So intentional or just a racing incident?
That's a million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
To this day, fans still debate what really happened.
Yeah.
But it was a move that immediately made people question Schumacher, question his sportsmanship, even if it did win him the championship.
It definitely casts a shadow, right? And then it happens again in 97, this time with Jacques Villeneuve. So the 1997 European Grand Prix, the final race of the season. And once again, it all comes down to the wire Schumacher versus Villeneuve.
In history, well, it kind of repeats itself.
Yeah.
Another collision, another championship decided under controversial circumstances.
But this time, there's a twist, right? The stewards, they're like the referees of Formula One.
Right, the FIA stewards.
They see this crash, and they penalize Schumacher. They strip him of his points for the season, basically saying, nope, this wasn't just a racing incident, this was intentional.
Which was a huge deal, right? Because it implied that Schumacher, in their eyes, had intentionally crashed into Villeneuve to try and win the championship. And it ignited this massive debate about his driving, about whether he was willing to cross the line to win.
It's amazing how two incidents just a few years apart can have such a lasting impact on a driver's reputation. So we've got this incredibly talented driver, prone to controversy, but there's this other big move that really defined Schumacher's career, joining Ferrari in 1996.
Ah, Ferrari. It's like you say the word and it evokes this aura, this history, this passion. But back in the 90s, let's just say Ferrari wasn't exactly the powerhouse team it is today.
They weren't exactly setting the world on fire.
Not even close. They were struggling to keep up with teams like Williams and Benetton. In fact, some drivers even referred to the Ferrari car as a truck. Clunky, unreliable.
I remember hearing an accident waiting to happen thrown around a bit too. Not exactly a ringing endorsement.
No, not at all. So for Schumacher, who was already a world champion at this point, to sign with Ferrari, it was a huge risk. Many people, they thought it was career suicide.
Yeah, it seemed like a crazy move, but that's what's so interesting about this whole period. Schumacher didn't just want to win, he wanted to rebuild. He saw the potential in Ferrari, the history, the legacy, and he was determined to bring them back to their former glory.
And what's amazing, he later admitted that the 1996 Ferrari, the car he signed on to drive, he said it was almost undrivable. But despite that, he still managed to win 3 races that season. Just think about that for a second.
That's pure driving talent right there, isn't it? He could take a car that was fighting him every step of the way and still manage to win races, and he did eventually bring them back to the top, right? 5 consecutive championships from 2000 to 2004. But even during those dominant years with Ferrari, the controversies, they didn't completely disappear.
Unfortunately not. And the one that really sticks out is the 2002 Austrian Grand Prix. Schumacher is about to win the race, but here's the thing. His teammate, Rubens Barrichello, is leading. And then Barrichello gets instructions from the Ferrari team.
Oh boy, here we go.
Yeah. They tell him to slow down, to let Schumacher pass him.
So for those who might not be familiar with Formula One, this whole team orders thing is a very touchy subject.
Right.
Basically, a team might tell one driver to help the other, often for strategic reasons like championship points.
Right, like maybe one driver is in a better position to win the championship overall, so they get preferential treatment.
Exactly. But in this case, with Schumacher and Barrichello in Austria, it left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. It felt unfair to Barrichello, even if it was technically within the rules.
Yeah, and you could see it even got to Schumacher, the awkwardness on the podium afterward. He knew it didn't sit well with a lot of people. He even tried to appease the crowd, let Barrichello stand on the top step.
Trying to smooth things over.
Yeah, but the damage was done. And it sparked this whole other debate about sportsmanship in Formula One, the role of team strategy versus individual achievement.
Mm-hmm.
Was Schumacher's loyalty to Ferrari, this team he'd helped rebuild, more important than winning on merit? It's a tough one.
It's a question that's still debated today. Okay, but let's shift gears a bit, because this Wikipedia article you provided, it also highlights another side of Schumacher, his life away from the track.
Which was, for the most part, very private.
He was notoriously private, didn't really seek out the spotlight.
No, but there's this one aspect of his life that really stands out, even with his desire for privacy, and it's his philanthropy. Schumacher was incredibly generous, donating millions to various charities.
It's pretty remarkable when you look at the numbers. Like, after the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, he donated $10 million to the relief efforts. That's more than some countries contributed.
It is. And it wasn't just a one-time thing. This was a pattern throughout his career. Children's aid, environmental causes. He was involved with all sorts of charities, often anonymously. Didn't want the fanfare, just wanted to help.
Which I think speaks volumes about his character, you know.
It does. You have this incredibly competitive driver on the track, pushing the limits, sometimes courting controversy, and then you have this other side, this quiet generosity, this desire to use his platform for good.
Makes you think, doesn't it? About how we perceive public figures. We tend to judge them based on their public persona, on those controversial moments. But there's often so much more beneath the surface.
And with Schumacher, that complexity, it's amplified by what happened after his racing career.
The skiing accident.
Yes, in 2013, a horrific accident.
Yeah.
Schumacher suffers a severe head injury while skiing, and the details, well, they've been kept very private by his family, which is understandable, but it adds this whole other layer to his story, doesn't it?
It does, and it raises some really important and difficult questions about the public's right to know versus an individual's right to privacy.
Especially when you're talking about someone as famous as Michael Schumacher. On the one hand, you have this global icon loved by millions, and people naturally want to know how he's doing. They want to offer their support.
Of course. But on the other hand, you have the family, and they're going through an incredibly difficult time. They want privacy. They want to protect their loved one from the constant scrutiny of the media.
The tough situation. And it really highlights that ethical tightrope that journalists, even fans, have to walk in this age of instant information. We might have access to everything, but that doesn't mean we have a right to it, especially when it comes to someone's health, their well-being.
It's a tough one, for sure. And then you have incidents like the AI-generated interview earlier this year, where a publication used artificial intelligence to create fake responses from Schumacher. It was just
Well, that was awful.
awful, yeah. Thankfully, the family took legal action, but it just goes to show how the hunger for information, the need to fill that void, it can sometimes overshadow basic respect, basic decency.
It's a good reminder that even with all the technology in the world, we can't forget about empathy, about compassion, especially in situations like this.
Well said. So as we move into this final part of Schumacher's story, his legacy, I think it's so important to remember that we're dealing with a complex individual, a man who achieved incredible things, but also faced his share of controversies, a man who valued his privacy, yet used his platform to make a real difference in the world.
Here's a study in contrasts, a fascinating, complex figure. And it's in recognizing that, I think, that we can truly appreciate the impact of Michael Schumacher, both on and off the track.
Beautifully said. So are you ready to delve into that legacy?
Ready when you are.
Okay, so looking back, we've covered a lot. Schumacher's unwavering dedication, his almost scientific approach to racing, those controversial moments, his incredible philanthropy, and of course the accident that changed everything. How do you even begin to sum up a legacy like that?
It's tough, right? It's like his story has all these different threads, all intertwined. There's the Schumacher, who revolutionized Formula One, who showed the world what it really meant to be an F1 driver, physically and mentally.
Right, like we talked about earlier, he didn't just rely on natural talent. He pushed the limits of fitness, of strategy, of everything. He really did elevate the sport.
Absolutely. And then there's the Schumacher who resurrected Ferrari. I mean, they were struggling before he arrived, and he helped build them back into a dominant force. That's a legacy in itself.
No question about it. But then there's the other side of the coin, the controversies, the questionable maneuvers. Those moments definitely left a mark on his reputation.
They did, and I think that's what makes his legacy so interesting to dissect, even now. It's not a simple story. It's not just black and white. It's complicated, full of contradictions, and that's part of what keeps people talking about him.
It's that complexity that makes him human, right? He was flawed, he made mistakes, but he also achieved greatness. And then, of course, there's that final chapter, the accident in 2013, the silence that followed. It's impossible to ignore that part of his story, the impact it's had on how we view him, on how we think about legacy in general.
It's true. It's almost like his story took this unexpected turn, and it forced everyone, the fans, the media, to confront some really difficult questions.
About privacy, about how we treat our heroes, about the fine line between public interest and respecting someone's personal life. Especially in this age of social media where information spreads so quickly, where it feels like we're entitled to know everything.
It's a conversation that extends far beyond Michael Schumacher and Formula One, you know? It's something we all grapple with.
It's true. So where does that leave us? How do we ultimately define Michael Schumacher's legacy?
I don't think there's a single answer, a neat little bow to tie it all up. And maybe that's okay. Maybe it's more about asking the right questions than finding all the answers.
Yeah.
What do his victories mean in light of the controversies? Does his philanthropy change how we view his actions on the track?
Those are questions we could probably debate endlessly, and I think that's what makes his story so fascinating. It's a story that challenges us, that makes us think, and ultimately leaves us with more questions than answers.
And maybe that's a legacy in itself, to spark conversation, to challenge our perceptions, to make us think differently about success, about failure, about the human spirit. Michael Schumacher might not have all the answers, but he sure makes us ask the right questions.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll leave our listeners with those questions. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the life and legacy of Michael Schumacher, a man who was so much more than just a name on a record sheet. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.